Steven, why am I sitting here all by myself, twiddling my thumbs, holding my thumb? Are we recording? Oh, that's right. We got to get that autofocus video done. Sorry, everybody. Day late, not $1 short, just a day late. Enjoy the show.
So Steven left me high and dry yesterday, and by high and dry I mean he really didn't. He was busy. We made a decision to edit the Canon's autofocus is the greatest autofocus in the history of autofocuses, period, video.
Mind-blowing.
I don't even know if that's what the title is. I mean, I like that. I would totally write that Canon's autofocus is the greatest focus in all of time.
You would have a very literal paragraph if you could. If you could put as much text as you can in the title, it'd be like a freaking novel.
I probably would. Now, you guys know that it's been a pretty busy. Actually, you don't know because you didn't know that we had 2 cameras that we were working on making videos for. You kind of knew that Steven was off for a week, and then Dan was off for a week. And when Steven was off for a week, that was the week where Canon flew us, me, a few other creators out to beautiful Phoenix where it was 110 degrees to test the cameras out for a matter of hours.
Great place to test overheating.
Well, if you notice on the golf video,
I know.
Did you notice the overheating symbol coming up?
It started to tick up, yeah. You still have plenty of time, though. It takes a while to get to that red part.
Dude, I was outside. It was 7 in the morning when I was laying on the golf course.
100
degrees. It was 7 in the morning, and it was probably in the 90s at that point. But it didn't get below 90 usually, even at midnight or whenever. It was pretty damn hot. But a quick rundown of what's going to happen in this episode. We are going to talk about the photojournalistic photos that happened on Saturday from the Trump assassination attempt. If you haven't seen the video that I put out, please go watch the video that I put out because it breaks down the 4 photographers that were in the buffer area. I go into detail what they were doing. I break down how they're shooting, photographing, and the images that they captured. I talk about that. It's a really, really solid video that focuses solely on photography and photojournalism. Then we're getting into all the stuff about the R5 Mark II and the R1, the likes, the dislikes, and just going into more detail because there is so much to say about these things, and there's a lot of stuff to say about all this stuff.
A lot. It was a very busy 2 weeks for all of us.
Yeah, there's just so much content that has to be made, and it takes time.
Well, and then we were also scrambling come Monday after, obviously, the assassination attempt on Trump. We were trying to get a video out on that, but me and Dan were both trying to also finish the R1 and the R5 Mark II videos in the meantime, and we couldn't edit it. It was one time I'm like, Jared, you got to do this yourself. I can't help out.
Yeah, which was fine. It was old school.
It worked out.
It was old school where I film a video and I post a video, and then the video did really well. Just because it's just direct and to the point. It didn't need to be anything other than what it was.
Yep.
I guess we haven't talked about the boot camp because the boot camp was Saturday. The boot camp was really good. At the end of the boot camp is when I went like 2 hours over because of the critiques. And at the end, I had 2 more critiques left when the news of the Trump shooting came in. And so I had to still stay focused on the critiques
while all that's going down.
Trying not to worry about that until I was done.
Yeah.
The boot camp went extremely well. I think everybody was really happy with it. I think they learned a ton. There's so much information that gets out there. Having Greg, the professional sports photographer here, was so helpful because it's another voice that he has just other ideas and other thoughts and other ways of doing things. It's just nice to get that from not just me.
He's a cropper that shoots JPEG, so yeah.
So
differing opinions.
Somewhat. Well, no. Our thoughts on the fundamentals of photography are not any different. They're fundamentals of photography. And that was important. We start the day with the talk where everybody's introducing themselves, what they hope to get out of it, which is great because the interactions between the 15 people were here trigger things for me to talk about. I didn't even need to look at my notes to hit the things I wanted to hit about intention and all the pre-visualization because all of it was brought up by what they were saying. So I thought it was very important to sit and talk first, and then we got to the action. 2 models, 2 hours of that, lunch. I mean, just the stuff that we did with the models was great. It was like shit light, shade light, and like, how do we work around this? And it's really just getting people into the mindset of the fundamentals of photography and how to think about it and nothing pisses me off more than people looking through the using the the screen instead of the EVF. So I just have to correct people and explain why and demonstrate why it's more efficient. Yeah, demonstrate why. Yeah, you should listen to the cameras outside that would have recorded the whole thing with audio.
I gotta play it back.
You pull that video up.
What are you doing?
No, I just, there's nothing wrong with correcting people who are learning and just calling it out the way that it is in a nice way and watching people get better. There were some, what was great with the critique, other than it took forever, so that wasn't great, was the fact that there's 15 people's images being critiqued and you didn't see the same images, basically the really good ones. There's something unique and different about all of them, even though they were photographing the same model in some situations. It was just cool to point out. You look at people's bad photos, and I think it's important that I don't allow people to just pick their best 20. I had them go into single shooting so that it wasn't motor driving, which just makes things so much easier to go through. But when you see the shitty photos and then a photo pops up and you're like, that's a winner, I think it's so important for everybody to see the difference between quality and shit.
Sure.
And everybody was able to come out with something.
I mean, it sounds like your own little mini press event, minus you scrambling trying to test out a new camera in 4 hours.
Yeah, kind of. It is, because it is
you
throwing
have
people
models
through
set
a
up,
lot.
different situations set up, sports, action.
So it went well. I think people learned a lot. There's the skill levels of people are all over the place. So it's just catering to each person. They liked that they could come up and talk to me and ask questions, and I'm helping everybody.
That's what I was more curious about, the level of each photographer that was there. Was it more beginner-centric, intermediate, where there are just people there that wanted to meet you? I mean, I'm sure it was a little mix of everything.
It's a mix of everything. I mean, nobody that's like super duper professionally advanced.
What about gear?
Well, 90% had Canons. 90% were like R6 Mark IIs because of me, is what they said. One DSLR was a D850, one Z8,
wow,
a Sony A9 III for one of our more advanced people. She was really good, and a couple of other Sonys. But other than that, it was like predominantly Canon cameras.
Interesting.
Which is interesting. So and like, some people don't have all of the glass, but one guy had like a 18 to something, and he got one of the best pictures I saw from across the basketball court. It was incredible.
I expected more of that, more of the lower end beginner type gear, budget friendly. That's great that you had a little bit of everything.
The boot camp was really good. We've got another one coming up on the 27th. There is one spot available still. I didn't push, like after the 14 of 15 sold, I didn't want to be like blasting out to move the last one. But if you do think that you would like to come to Philly on the 27th, which is Saturday, you can go to bit.ly/July 27 Fro, and that will take you over. There is one ticket left.
I'm glad it all worked out, man. And the rain held off. I mean, well, it rained all night, but thankfully
we didn't get any rain.
In the morning, you were good.
Yeah, we were good. It was hot, but it was good.
Humid,
we did,
but expected.
Yep, we did good. So let's change gears now to Saturday, the photojournalists. Like I said, if you haven't seen the video, go see the video. I don't want to recap that entire thing, but it was incredible to see photojournalists in action, that when the shots rang out, they ran towards the stage to get the images.
Yeah.
You got Evan Vucci, you've got Doug Mills, Anna Moneymaker, and then that Jabin, I'm not sure, Brentworth, I'm not sure what his last name is. He's Washington Post. There's 4 people that were allowed into the buffer zone, and they're allowed because, from what I've been told, is that Trump handpicked those 4 from the news, the media that he prefers to share his image.
The non-fake news.
Yeah, so it's the New York Times, Getty, Washington Post, and
AP.
The AP.
Yeah.
And so I was talking with Evan Vucci over Instagram about the images not too long after they happened. I chose to share the images real fast with my commentary and then do some Insta stories, just choosing words very wisely, keeping it to just photography, which is the important thing to talk about.
I'm curious, do they wear earplugs? Because in a concert situation, obviously we're right next to every single monitor and it's blasting in our ears, and we're wearing earplugs and ear protection. And if something like that happened, I wonder if they would even really know, like, a bullet just went off. Are they wearing earplugs, or is there just no ear protection at all because it's not like they're next to a giant monitor?
Well, that's a good question, and I will tell you that Some photographers I sit with at the baseball games wear earplugs,
I know
especially
a
in
lot
playoffs.
A lot of event photographers do it.
When it comes to playoffs, I put earplugs in too because it helps me focus. But also sometimes you still want to hear the rest of the world. But I will say that earplugs make it easier to hear the rest of the world sometimes.
I was going to say you still do. It just kind of filters out the rest of the noise and lets you focus on the main noise that's going on.
Yeah, so if I do get Evan Vucci on, he said he would come on after the Republican National Convention ends, which ended last night, and he said he'll come on next week. So I'm interested to talk to him, and I want to know, actually, I got the answer because he watched the video I put out, and I'm like, he's looking through the viewfinder. He's also putting the viewfinder over his head like most of the photographers were. He was looking through the viewfinder for that image.
Oh, thank God. We don't have to yell at him.
And my big question is, if you weren't looking through the viewfinder, would you not have seen the composition as good? Because if you look at Doug Mills, who was next to Evan, Evan has the lower angle of Trump standing up and pumping his fist and getting the everything and the flag, whereas Doug got the same shot but doesn't have the flag.
Is he holding the camera?
He's holding it above his head.
There you go.
And then Jabin, I think that's how you say it. He's taller. And so he's holding it above everybody else, which means his level is off too. We have to remember that low angles are what make people look a certain way. Yeah. Yes, it's a hero shot. And so Anna Moneymaker, she's shorter, but she got the photo between the legs of the Secret Service agents with Trump on the ground with the blood and with the hat upside, the flag upside down. Extremely powerful image as well.
Oh yeah.
And I think they all go hand in hand to tell the story and see how that they captured unique things. And Doug got the one with the vapor or whatever left after a bullet whizzed by, whatever was there, he captured it, right? And so the biggest takeaway from what happened on Saturday and the last couple of days is that photography is not going anywhere. No matter how many people have cell phones and take video and crappy video, and know how many people are rolling in video, the still image persists and will continue to persist for all of time, because you will not replace photojournalists by robots or by AI thinking for them. They need to react in the moment. They need to stay calm, which Evan Vucci talks about. He was saying in the quote was something like, stay calm and compose, right? Compose your image and stay calm. I mean, these are things that myself as a photojournalist in many situations, you have to stay calm. People are like, aren't you nervous? I might be nervous right before something happens, right before I do my photo shoot. As soon as it's go time, that nervousness is gone, and it's focus, compose. Focus, expose, and compose is really the things that go through my mind, is stay calm no matter what situation I'm in, and don't panic.
I didn't know that there was an intern in the pit as well. I know you mentioned that in the video. Apparently they ran off as the shooting was happening, right? And I don't blame them at all. It's the whole fight or flight thing. But I'm curious how I would react in that situation. I like to think I would stay and capture the moment, but it's so hard to say.
Yeah, the reason they don't have a photographer, I was told that Trump's photographer quit a few weeks ago.
Imagine how he's feeling now. Ugh. Missing that moment.
Been a she. I think it was a she.
Okay.
No, I don't think she could handle, to put it bluntly, Trump. I think he's very difficult to work for from an image standpoint, right? And so they quit, and they've been sending interns in to do the photos. And this is not a slight on interns, but they're not seasoned photojournalists. And that's the difference between what the 4 other photographers did and then the other running the other way, which you don't blame them. You don't know how you'd react.
Of course.
But I will tell you, from being out with Bernie, I was always concerned about a shooter because he's exposed.
I meant to talk to you about that because I don't recall seeing Secret Service, really. I mean, there was always local police with us.
Well, you remember what happened in Colorado, right?
I don't.
So Colorado, there were like 10 to 15,000 people. Right?
Yeah.
We're after Bernie left, right? He was going to debate prep, and we were going to take a red eye. We took a red eye home, but we were waiting inside of the hold building, the building where Bernie was holding before he went out. Coming down the stairs, there were snipers that walked past us with the longest rifles that you've ever seen. They had snipers that I didn't know were there that were up on the roof casing just to make sure, just to be counter snipers or just to be proactive.
I didn't see them personally at all.
Well, I didn't see them during the event, but they walked past us when it was over.
I think they walked past you. I don't think I saw them.
I saw them coming down the stairs.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. So the reason they're there partly is it's part of the city that doesn't want something that go wrong there, right? If something happens on their watch, they want to make sure that it doesn't happen. I mean, there were times when I was with Bernie and AOC in LA, and we're in the hold area, and they just had those fences with the tarp on it. And I look up, there's like a hill, there's a building. And yeah, he had extra security, which was very close to Secret Service, but not, because we had extra. But we were just exposed back there. I'm looking around. I'm like, we're exposed.
That's more what I'm getting at. I don't recall having like a whole team of Secret Service surrounding him.
Not when you were there.
Not
you
when
had
I was
one
there at
guy.
all. There was local police at some of the events. That's about it. Maybe one or two people.
Actually, there were 2 extra in Iowa that first time. I remember that now. There were the 2 extra guys that were with us, and then you had the body man. They're in the photos that I have. They're in the photo book.
I mean, he had his own personal security too, but there was no actual Secret Service on site that I recall.
He's not carrying a gun. The personal security guy, I don't think he was carrying a gun.
I don't think he was either. No.
The body man?
Yeah.
I don't think he was.
Local police definitely was, but I don't recall the big guy. Yeah, the body man.
For those who know, the body man is really the person that is next to the politician at all times.
His personal bodyguard, yeah.
Someone reaches out, someone does something, they hold things, they move people out of the way, they keep their eyes peeled. I always have my eyes peeled in these situations for things that look out of place. I know it's not my job, but I'm the closest one to the stage in many situations.
And I know he wasn't the official Democratic nominee, but still you would think there would be Secret Service at every single event, at least more than there were in terms of security.
It would have happened. He was about to get Secret Service protection. I mean, it's crazy to think how exposed you are. There's really no way to stop someone that wants to do something and get close. It's just there was
the lack of security. Yeah, it's just mind blowing.
It is. In some situations, it's just pretty freaky. So I'm always aware in those situations, but I mean, I'm staying focused on capturing the moment. I mean, there's times where shit's going down and you're photographing. That's your job.
Of course.
And that's the biggest takeaway, is that the photojournalists have a job to do and they're doing it. And unfortunately, it's putting their life at risk in some situations, but they're there to get the images. It's just nuts. It's just the whole situation is nuts.
Yeah.
And the photographers did a fantastic job showing why they are what they are.
And like you said, photojournalism is not dead, and it's not going anywhere, because think about it. When the news broke, the first thing you pretty much saw, minus the live stream, obviously, were the photos. Most of those photos were out immediately. Most of those wire servicers were pushing those photos versus, all of the people taking videos and photos on their phone and stuff like that came out later. But the first initial things you saw were essentially the photographs from these excellent photographers.
And I will tell you how the images got out, because the cell coverage was taken down.
Yep.
At the point, right? So I'm holding, and I did a video on Instagram, this brand new Sony device that basically works as a transmitter. Think of it as a cell phone, one of their whatever Sony calls their cell phone, but it's built to be a monitor. It has internal storage that you can also add a terabyte of storage for storing images that then get transmitted when you get back to a signal.
Terabyte,
but
wow.
The point about this is that this device allowed Doug Mills and everybody else to transmit their data, because even though the cell networks were taken down, there's different bands on cell networks. There's an emergency responder band. So the police and the firefighters have their own band that doesn't get taken down, so they can continue to be in communication. If you have an enterprise SIM card from Verizon, from T-Mobile, from AT&T, and whoever else, you're on a different band. I know that these were being used at the RNC, and I saw the data. My buddy took a picture where it shows that his cell phone signal was getting like 10 up, and that was it, or 10 down and not very much up. And the down for the device was was 2 megabits down with over 100 megabits up. Megabytes up.
Sure.
So So you were getting speeds because you were going on a different band that is cleaner and clearer. Like if you're at a stadium with 20,000 people, everybody's trying to clamp on to the same
network.
Well, this goes on that network, but there's a different band that is open, that is cleaner and clearer to allow for data transfer. That's how all the data got out instantly.
So essentially, it's an uninterrupted hotspot.
It can be, yes. And so what you can do, and I was told that this might be how some of them are shooting, is it has a LAN connection on the back of it.
Wow.
You can plug right from the camera into here while you're shooting. It can be plugged in,
Tethered.
and that when when you tag an image. If this is how you have it set, you tag an image, it can automatically transfer to the FTP site, or you could drop it on the Dropbox. Like anywhere you need it to go, it will automatically go.
Is that only compatible, that feature, with Sony cameras?
Any camera, Sony, Canon, Nikon, doesn't matter. Whatever you need an app for, this is an Android device. So I was thinking about this for the baseball photographers that are always popping a card out of their cameras to then put it into a card reader that's plugged into the bottom of their iPhone, to then transfer to the iPhone, to then do a quick edit and then upload it, take the card out and put it back in the camera. If they had this device and they were plugged into this while shooting, all they would need to do is tell the tagged images to send it to this device. They could open Lightroom Mobile right here. They could put a preset on it real quick.
Wow.
They could upload it right from there if that's what they need to do.
Skittles.
If they just want to have the image go straight up, they could have the image go straight up for someone else, an editor to tweak.
So speaking of editing, do you think the assassination attempt photos were edited or just straight out of camera JPEGs, get them uploaded, that's it? I assume they're just JPEGs right out of camera. Let's get them to the press.
Well, most of these people are shooting JPEGs. I know that the AP, I know they don't accept RAW files, but I'm not
are they shooting RAW
totally
plus
sure.
JPEG?
Well, I'm not sure if they're saving RAW files. I know some people might be, and I would think that they should be just to have. But just keep this in mind: they're uploading the photos that they think should be used, and then the editors on the other end are pushing the stuff out into the world because there's photo editors.
Sure.
The Doug Mills photo with the thing whizzing by is a massive crop.
120%.
Oh, it's a massive crop because he was shooting vertical with a 24 millimeter 1.4 for that photo.
Wow.
Because he had it composed. The original has it composed with the flag up above with the cranes. And so he had Trump in the bottom part of the frame when he was banging away with the A1.
I heard that he did not know that the bullet or whatever, the vapor or whatever it was, the bullet trail was even in the shot until the editor pointed it out.
He didn't know until he, I think, previewed the images after he got the other image out.
Wow.
And then he was going through and he said he checked that it was in this photo but not in the ones before and then not in the ones after, and he's like, he told them what to look for.
Do you think he had pre-shooting on? Oh wait, this is the A1. It didn't have pre-shooting.
No, he had no pre-shooting. It was the A1. He was shooting at 1/8,000th of a second at f1.6 with a 24-1.4. Now, a lot of questions I saw were posted about why 8,000, 1/8,000th of a second. Like, why would you do that? And does that matter? And the answer is no, it doesn't matter. He's shooting at 1.6 in a sunny, bright day. He's shooting at the right exposure.
That's also why I've always said the max shutter speed is very important, especially when you're shooting wide open on these bright sunny days. Unless you have an ND filter of some sort, you need to push usually past 1.8. I'm sure he was at 1.6 because he couldn't be at 1.4 probably. He was probably overexposed at that point. Although
or he accidentally hit it.
Does that camera go above 1/8,000th?
I think it goes to 1/16,000th.
Okay.
I have it right here, Steven. I actually have an A1 here because what lens am I testing? I'm testing a Canon lens. So this is just here because I was checking something. Let's see. Let me dial it up. Oh shit, 1/32,000th of a second.
Okay.
So the A1 goes, no, he was at the right exposure. And see, that's the thing. This is something that I spoke about at my event in the morning. I'm like, there's times where I start with a higher shutter speed, 1/4,000, 1/5,000th of a second. There's a reason I do that, because if a big cloud comes by and I lose a stop or two of light, the quickest thing to do is just dial down that shutter speed real fast, but I'm still at 1/2000th of a second. Where if you start at 1/1000th of a second and you lose 2 stops of light, you're at 1/250th of a second, and your action is not going to work out right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm preemptively setting the camera the way that I want. And so there is no problem whatsoever shooting at 8,000th of a second, 16,000th of a second. The right exposure is the right exposure. That's the answer. And I man, my arms look really good in video right now, Steven. I know you. Oh my God, today was arm day. Anyway, so 1/8,000th is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Those guys should be commended. I do want to talk about the flip screen, though, because you watch as Doug holds the screen above his head. You watch as Evan holds the screen above his head. They're using Sony's. So either the A1 or the A9 III. So it tilts with one movement. They're able to like do one movement. If you were to use the Canon to do this, you have to flip it out, grab it, rotate it, probably the wrong way at first, which is the wrong way because you're going to break it. If you go you really think you should flip it the one way, but it has to flip the other way. And then you have to get your line straight, which you can't do. So yeah, well, you did it right. I'm watching Steven do it right now.
But you're right. You have to basically flip it the opposite way. This is the R5 and then hold it up.
Yeah. So that is just the wrong thing to do. Yeah. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be holding their cameras up to try and find different angles. They do that because they need to in some situations. If you can't get high enough or low enough, then you put it down there or up there, and that's fine. I'm just talking about the screen that Canon uses. The mechanism they use to flip and rotate is wrong. It's not efficient. It's not good because you can't get your line straight. Anybody that's tried it knows that the lines are much more difficult to get straight than if it's attached to the back of the camera. Canon needs to not like when those flip screens started to happen, people were like, oh, it's great for vlogging. Fuck you. No one's vlogging with this camera.
I mean, I do use it a lot for video work, obviously, but for photography, I'm never, ever really using it unless I am low to the ground or above my head. But like you said, then you have line issues where you have to try and, correct the skew of the camera, and you're not really getting that perfect level every single time.
No, but even for video, it's just like I rather have the screen on the back of the camera than on the side.
Yeah, but I find myself doing a lot of B-roll and stuff like that and flipping it around to if I'm not behind the camera, if I'm like on the side of the camera or something like that. I do that a lot, at least in the studio.
And that's where the A9 III's screen comes in handy.
Of course. And the A7
it can do
R5.
everything that you want it to do.
Now, speaking of that, primarily Sony cameras during this event, right? Were they all Sony's?
Well, the AP uses Sony. I guess the New York Times can either choose what they want. So Doug uses Sony.
Okay.
Moneymaker shoots for Getty, so she was using Canon. I'm not sure how Washington Post decides to choose what they choose, but I think they can choose between Sony and Nikon. And I know AP shooters that shoot Nikon as well. So I'm pretty sure I know AP shooters that shoot Nikon.
It's really up to the photographer at that point.
In those situations, but I know that a lot of the people out there were using Sony. It was a big
A1, A9 III.
A1 and A9 III are predominantly what they're using out there.
Wow.
And then I'm assuming Moneymaker was probably using an R3, if I had to guess.
Isn't it pretty insane to think about that Sony is now dominating that space when just a few years ago it was always Canon and Nikon?
I mean, Nikon was huge in the industry, but for press, and now it's just dead in the industry. I mean, there are very few people are using it for obvious reasons. Now let's shift gears because we'll take the next half of the show to get into the R1 and the R5 Mark II. Obviously, we knew what was coming. We obviously know that for most things. We know what's coming. And the R5 Mark II was a surprise to everybody.
Yeah.
It was a surprise to us when they talked about it.
So we knew there was going to be an event. Obviously, we got invited. We thought it was going to be just the R1.
Yeah, most people that got to the event didn't know that there were going to be two. Now, we were able to get a quick hands-on because Steven was going to be away and he does all the cool B-roll. And so we were able to have them come down for a couple of hours before the trip. I wasn't allowed to shoot with the camera, but we were allowed to do the B-roll, which was really helpful.
Thankfully, we got a quick briefing. That was the tough part with this specific trip is we really didn't get a full briefing. So even leading up to doing the video, I was still kind of questioning half the specs. But in the end, I think it all worked out. I confirmed a lot of them with Canon before the actual videos went live, and it all worked out. But usually on these trips, when I'm with you, I'm confirming with the engineers that are on site, but obviously I couldn't do that this time around. And we only got invited, 3 weeks before the event, so I couldn't cancel my vacation. My wife would have absolutely killed me, and I don't blame her for that. And I rented a house with my entire family, so it's like I couldn't just back out.
I didn't really question you on it.
No. It just happened to be, of course, Murphy's Law, one of the biggest press trips ever, and I had to miss it.
It's one of the worst press trips ever. I'll just throw that out there.
And I'm also very glad I didn't go on it, because I would have been running around like a chicken with my head cut off, for sure.
Yeah. What makes a press trip bad versus makes a press trip good? The right amount of time versus the wrong amount of time.
Yep.
You have 2 cameras, and we basically had 3 hours of total shoot time, in my opinion, to actually do it. Maybe it's 4, but that was it. And there really wasn't a lot. I mean, I snuck out to go shoot the golf myself, 7 in the morning, because I needed something. I'm on East Coast time, and now I'm on the West Coast, getting up at like 4:35 in the morning. Breakfast isn't till from 7 to 9, and I'm like, I need to go do something. And so I did. I went out and got the golf photos, which I think were really helpful to get.
The thing is, back in the day when we would complain about press trips, they would give us 2 or 3 days for like one camera, which to us was way too much time. Maybe 2 days, but for the most part, 1 day. 1 day was usually enough time. A full shooting day, 5, 6, 7 hours, something like that, with, lunch in between, travel in between. But then they started doing, at least Canon on every press trip, introducing 2 cameras. But in the past, they've always given us 2 days, one for each camera, essentially. If the press event was in Phoenix, we could walk around Phoenix or New Orleans or wherever it may be. We can kind of go off on our own. This specific trip, albeit I was not on the actual trip, this specific trip was much different because it was 2 cameras in one single day, only a few hours, not nearly enough time. They really should have, and especially it's 2 major cameras.
The last time we did 2 cameras with Canon was the R10 and the R7, and we had 2 days with those cameras.
Actually, it might have been the R8 and R50.
Okay, well, I guess they've done it twice, because one was Florida, which was the R7, R10 with the volleyball girls who had the bathing suits up their ass.
Remember and they had tons of events, and it was 2 full days.
Yeah, it was very difficult to shoot those beach volleyball girls. I was like, how do I not shoot this so that their ass and their thong up their ass is right here?
But that's the thing, though, is usually those other trips too, there's like one major camera and then one minor camera that like, okay, there's not tons of features to really test out. Let's focus on the R7 versus the R10, or let's focus on the R8 versus the R50 on that specific trip, or the R6 Mark II trip where it was a 135 1.8 lens came out plus the R6 Mark II. Obviously, you can use them in tandem, so it wasn't that big of a deal. This trip, though, it's 2 major cameras with tons of new features to test out. I mean, you're talking about a flagship plus an R5 Mark II in one day.
And we're shooting indoors, and we're not really shooting things that I would want to shoot personally. This is why we personally would rather have the camera sent to us.
What Sony does, and Nikon comes to us. And we get multiple. I mean, Sony, we have weeks to test out
Sometimes
something.
We do. Sometimes we have weeks with a brand new camera.
Or the ZV-E10 too, where we had days. That was tough.
Days. Yeah, but at least I could do what I wanted to do. Right? I don't have to travel across the country to worry about it and take our time up. I mean, this stuff takes a lot of time.
And speaking of taking a lot of time, that's how these past few weeks have been. I can finally kind of open up about that it's just been complete chaos for us, because we had the Z6 III, we had the ZV-E10 Mark II, which I had to do right before my vacation. That was news to us, if you recall. They hit us up with the briefing, Friday? And then we had until like Wednesday to do something with it, because I had to go on vacation and try and get something done and filmed. Then we had these 2 camera releases, which we knew about, but we didn't have them in our hands until right before the week before vacation. So all of that was leading up to my vacation, and then on top of that, coming back to try and finish and film the R5 Mark II and the R1 videos, because while I was on vacation, you were on this press trip, and then coming back, we had to then make the actual video, and obviously it took time because there were 2 major videos, 2 25+ minute videos. The R1 is a 35-minute video.
Our videos are 35 minutes and 25 minutes. No one else put out content like we put out.
I mean, the R1 almost took me 5-6 full days, and thankfully we had Dan, so I can throw him the R5 Mark II, and that took him 4 or 5 days.
It's crazy what goes on behind the scenes that we need to do. But let's shift on talking about the R1 right here.
Yeah.
Obviously, I questioned whether it's a flagship. Now, we're not going to go over every single nuance of the camera. You've watched our video by now, I would think, and we'll hit on certain specs. From a flagship standpoint, it is a flagship body physically, because it's a big ass fucking body. I don't feel that it needs to be a body like that anymore, because the R3 was a great feeling body, and if they just tweaked that, I would have been perfectly fine.
And the R1, the reasoning behind making it the wider body is because they wanted more room to accommodate bigger hands and gloves. That's at least what they told us. So
bullshit.
Between the grip and the mount, there's a lot more room. But if you actually hold the camera, I felt like I was then hitting the function buttons. They moved them as well. And I felt like every time I held the grip, I was on the function buttons, which before with the R3, you still had that kind of room in between. So I personally still would go with an R3 design because it is also a quarter-pound lighter too on top of that.
Yeah. And obviously it's a fine line to walk between being harsh, being real, being transparent, like being all of it. I questioned the flagship nature because in this day and age when there's a 50 megapixel camera shooting 30 frames per second from Sony, then you have the Nikon Z9 that's 45 megapixels doing 20 frames a second RAW, not as good in my opinion all around obviously, but people were going to question 24 megapixels. Now, 24 megapixels is the highest number of megapixels in a flagship that they've done because it was 18 and it was 20 before. So the 1DX Mark III had 20 megapixels, and it's fine. I think what's going to happen when we get these cameras in our hands and they get into real photographers' hands over the next couple of months, you are going to see the flagship nature of 24 megapixels with the cleanliness of ISO. And I'm not talking about shooting at 25,000 and 30,000 and 40,000 ISO being clean. I'm talking about 4,000 to 8,000. The cleanliness of shooting in those areas is what I care about.
Looking like 800 ISO.
Right. If 4,000 looks like what 1,000 or 1250 looked like a matter of years ago, that's a good thing. Though 4,000 in the R3 and 8,000 in the R3 are perfectly, they basically look the same from 4,000 to 8,000. And if you have so little light that you need to be at 25,600 and beyond, then the picture doesn't matter anyway because there's no light. We're using 85s, we're using 1.2s all over the places. We're using f2s.
And we weren't told about any dual base ISO or maybe even like a triple base ISO like the C400 now has, which who knows, that could be the same sensor because that also is a 24 megapixel stacked sensor that we were told is not the R3 sensor. So I'm curious, is that also the R1 sensor? I'm really not sure. I would assume that this camera also has some kind of dual base ISO structure, so it is much cleaner once you hit 6400 and above or something like that. It hits that second native ISO.
People are going to start to see the importance of 24 and why that's not 45. Because I know from shooting the 45, the R5 Mark II, that you have that option right there. If you want to shoot 45, you can go with that and get 30 frames a second. But I see that ISO at 4,000 and 5,000 is okay, but it's not the same as what you're going to get at 4,000 and 5,000 from an R1.
The issue with me is that the R5 series, the 5 series in general, was always supposed to be the jack of all trades, master of none type camera, which I think it is for the most part. I think it does even more than that, where the flagships were always meant to be the master of all type cameras. And I just think that this R1 is not a master of all type camera. It does not offer, I think the R5 Mark II offers more.
Yeah, but let's take a step back. You go back 5-6 years. You go back to the DSLR age. It wasn't about the video features as much.
We shouldn't have to take a step back, though. We should be taking a step forward.
I'm telling you that back in the day, the flagship still camera was meant to give you the best still features around. And I don't think that the best stills camera around needs to have every subtle nuance and video feature. I don't need my R3 to be the best shooting camera for video. I need it to be the best shooting camera for photos. If I want to shoot video, I'm going to take that R5 because that's going to be fantastic for doing that. But I still rather have the less megapixels. I mean, I get what you're saying. I get the R1 has.
You just gotta compare it now. You got the A1, the Z9.
Correct.
They are the master of all type cameras. They have everything. The flagship, everything will then slightly trickle down to the lower end bodies. It's not the opposite way around. I just feel like with the R1, again, the R5 Mark II is almost beating it. That is the true flagship to me. Give the R1 the 45 megapixel sensor with 30 frames per second. There you have an A1 almost.
Sure, but maybe they just didn't want it. Who knows why they didn't do it? Maybe they wanted to go with a global shutter and technology wasn't ready yet, and this is what they ended up doing.
And I would have been totally okay if this mimicked a global shutter, and that was their reasoning for a 24 megapixel sensor of some sort, but the readout speed is really not that much faster than the competition. Now, it is faster than the R3, but when you start to get to these numbers, anything below 5 millisecond readout for the most part, there's not much of a significant difference unless you're shooting some insanely fast moving subject. But for the most part, I think they said this mimics a mechanical shutter now, which is about 3 milliseconds. This has a...
They said better than the 1DX Mark III.
Yeah, so this has a 1/320th of a second flash sync speed for the electronic shutter, which usually gives away what the readout speed is. So that equates to about 3 milliseconds, where the Z9 and the A1, they're both about 4 milliseconds. So it's just barely beating out in readout speed terms the A1 and the Z9, which not that big of a deal.
Well,
you know?
So where a lot of the questioning of the flagship comes from is when you get into the comparison world. Mm-hmm. If the other cameras didn't exist and you had 40 frames a second, you'd be like, holy shit, that's the most incredible thing ever. We couldn't do that before.
But you have an R3 that does 30. So is it that mind-blowing if the other competition didn't exist, if you took that out of the equation and it was just an R3 and an R1?
No, but it would be an R3 Mark II. It would
I'd
be
still
an evolution.
Be disappointed is what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, it would be an evolution. But I mean, there's certain things I wanted. I wanted pre-shooting and I wanted to shoot faster.
Yeah.
Those are the two things that I cared about.
Sure.
So I'm getting 40 frames a second and I'm getting pre-shooting, not the way I personally want it, at 20 frames every time I take a picture, because I can't limit it to less than a half a second, which is what I would personally want to do. But the reason I question flagship is certain things that should be there that aren't. 40 frames per second, where's 60, where's 120, where's the mode for 195 that was in the R3? Like, taking things out that existed before, or why you question it. When an A9 III exists that shoots at 120 frames per second with a global shutter and has pre-shooting that's done right, you question what Canon is doing and calling it a flagship, because other cameras already do certain things better than this. That's not saying quality is going to be better, and that's definitely not saying autofocus is going to be better, because the autofocus is by far more superior to that of any camera in the history of cameras on the market, period. Better than an A9 III, regardless of what anybody says. I've used every one of these cameras in the last 10 years. Every high-end mirrorless camera since they've come out, except for the very early shitty Sony ones. I've used them all. I know the differences between the focusing systems. I've used them in real-world situations, so I can tell you for a fact that the R1's autofocus is the best autofocus that I've ever seen and is better than everyone else. And it's not to say that the A9 III's isn't good.
Oh, I completely agree. And before we get into the autofocus talk, I would highly recommend watching the video we just put out today, which is all about the R1 and R5 Mark II's autofocus and the new focus modes that it has, especially the action priority mode, which is just insane. It's absolutely insane what this mode does. The camera's thinking faster than you at this point. But this camera now both cameras they basically skipped dual pixel AF3 and they're calling it dual pixel intelligent AF, which is essentially what they're calling it with this new Digic accelerator processor. It's their AI processor that Sony has. And the difference with the R1 and the R5 Mark II is the R1 now has a cross-type autofocusing system on the sensor. But honestly, looking at the footage, the R5 Mark II and the R1, they both look damn good. I mean, there wasn't really a noticeable difference in my opinion.
No, the action priority mode was one of the most incredible, mind-blowing things. I went over to the engineers and I was like, wow, like this mode is, you just see it in our video. So if you haven't seen it, go watch that video, because we slow it down. We show you exactly what's happening there. And I don't want to hear from people like, well, photographers always, they did this. Well, yeah, photographers at the beginning of photography didn't have focus because there was just a pinhole in a camera, and that was it. Everything evolves and everything changes. The true professional photographers will utilize the best that the cameras have to offer. So I will pull things out of it.
Embrace the technology, yes.
Right. I'm not going to miss things because of the new technology. I'm going to get things that I otherwise would have missed if I didn't have the technology. And that's what a lot of the photographers in the buffer with the assassination attempt photos rely on, that technology to know that even if they hold it up above their head and they're not looking, that the face detect is and the eye detect is going to find something. With that being said, if there's what Canon has, the face priority in the R5 Mark II and the R1, in a situation where there's a certain person that you want to always have be the priority focus, and you see their face clearly amongst other faces, then the autofocus will go to that face that you registered in your camera. It's crazy.
And if it is a public figure like Donald Trump, you could literally take a picture of a picture and use that picture as the source file for the people priority autofocus, which is very interesting. Now, I didn't realize that the R3 actually had that mode already. It was an update via firmware update. So that mode is available in your R3 as well. I'm curious if you've ever used it in the past or even knew about it.
No, I didn't really even know that it was there.
I feel like Canon said nothing about it, yeah.
No. And what you also have to understand is a lot of pros that are in the field, they don't care about the bells and whistles. They care about very minor things, exposing and composing and getting their focus right.
Honestly, they care more about resolution, I think.
So I want to talk about that because I think this needs to stop. I think this idea that a camera with 24 megapixels somehow isn't capable when we grew up shooting film, and I know everything evolves, but they used to crop back in the day. But if you have a problem with your image and you weren't close enough with the right gear or the right lens, or you want to cut out 89% or 98% of an image, then you're going to see the imperfections. Also, most of the people that are cropping in this industry, they're posting stuff online. So it really doesn't matter if you crop it. It doesn't matter if you have 50 megapixels or 24 or 12. No one's going to know the difference when you put it on their phone.
So prime example, the assassination attempt, that A1 photo was cropped in severely to get that vapor trail of the bullet or whatever it may be. If he had a 24 megapixel photo that was uncropped, I'm sure they wouldn't even have noticed it or just wouldn't have made the rounds like the one that was insanely cropped in from a high resolution sensor like the A1.
I think it would have been fine. I really do.
It's hard to say.
I just don't like this I think it comes down to a mentality thing. The mentality of, oh, I'll just fix it later. Or, the bird photographers are like, well, you have to crop. You need high resolution for birds. Well, no, you need to either get closer or have the right gear to do it. Because I'm tired of people thinking that you can make up for shitty lenses by just cropping. It's a mentality thing. And that's I said it in the video. I've used a 12 megapixel D2XS back in the day. I blow those pictures up to 4 feet by 6 feet. You would never know the difference. What's happening? You could blow billboards up from 4 megapixels. Going back, I have D2H images that are blown up in my house that are 4 megapixels. Crop sensor.
Yeah, I think that's where the R1 falls short, though, in terms of just overall base specs. People read the highlights and see 24 megapixel sensor, 40 frames per second. What changed? Minus the extra 10 frames per second bump in the frame rate. I think a lot of photographers, especially photojournalists, again, look at that. It's the A9 III all over again. It's the people that wanted the A1 resolution but see the A9 III has that 24 megapixel sensor and they're disappointed just because by reading that top level spec without realizing the power of the A9 III with the global shutter, the pre-shooting, the 120 frames per second and 14-bit RAW. I mean, that camera is just a beast, and it's not their flagship. And then you look at the R1.
Right. But what I'll say for the Sony people is that a lot of the A1 shooters were disappointed when the A9 III came out because they wanted more resolution.
Yep.
A bunch of them started using A9 IIIs and are like, I can't go back. Because it's all a trade-off, right? They love the image quality off of it. I think the image quality off of that A9 III is really unique. Like, there's just something about, there's a look to it that I was really happy with when I used it in Kenya. But they love that autofocus more. Remember when I switched from Sony over to the R3 officially?
Yeah.
It was after I took it out to the football game.
You had the resolution debate.
Well, I did. I had the resolution debate. I had the EVF debate recording, and I chose to go with the Canon for two main reasons, 28 to 70 f2 and the autofocus. Because you can go watch that video that we put out. Temple football was at the Lincoln Financial Field.
A1 versus R3.
A1 R3 400 millimeter 2.8s, both of them using using a recorder so you can see it, and you could see, and we talked about this, that the tracking box for the A1 was me telling it where to focus and then it locking on, but it could be the shoulder that it grabbed.
Correct.
Whereas the R3 could find the face, could find the head, even finds the back of the head and just does what it needs to do.
So Canon has always been terrible at marketing, in my opinion, versus Sony. The R3 has always had that torso head tracking where, you know, it can track the back of the head. It still knows it's a person instead of just waiting for the front of the head, like the face and whatever it may be. Sony, you always had to rely on the front of the face, at least back then with the A1 when it first came out. And you could always tell when you're forcing it to track on something with the 3D tracking because the box has the two lines at the top and bottom. When it automatically detects it's a person, it's just a regular square. So that's, if you watch that review, you constantly see the lines because you're telling the camera where to focus and where to stay sticky and lock on that subject, where Canon is automatically seeing that as a human being, a subject to track, and automatically locking on. Now, obviously, Sony has caught up with their AI processor that now does that with the A9 III and all A7R5, all the newer Sony bodies. So once the A1 II comes out, I'm curious with these other photographers that have switched from the A1 to the A9 III, will they then go back to an A1 II because it will have the updated autofocus screen, all of that with the high resolution bump. At least that's what I'm assuming it's going to be.
I would assume that an A1 II would have a better grip, the same grip as the A9 III.
It'll be the same
so
body,
it feels
just like
great.
Sony always does, yeah.
Right. I think it won't be a global shutter. Still 50 megapixels.
I agree.
And pre-shooting and the things that the R1 has, but do it at 50 megapixels. And then it becomes a real debate. Of, I think the the A9 III came out way too expensive. That camera should have been in the $5,000 range. It should have launched at $5,000, period. Not $6,500.
The A9 II, what was it, $4,500, right? So there was always that spot in between, the $4,500, and then you had to upgrade to $6,500 for the A1. But now it's just it's $6,000 and $6,500.
Just too much. That $6,000 is too much.
I agree.
Even if you made it $5,000.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
It's more expensive than the Z9 when it came out.
It's just crazy. Well, anything's better than that. It's just crazy that Sony has basically two cameras that could be considered flagship cameras. But there's subtle nuances in every system that makes one the better choice for someone else.
Agreed.
I'm going to shoot an R1. You're going to shoot an R5 Mark II.
Yep.
I have 5 houses. You have 1. That's the difference.
I'm the peasant on the back of the plane. You're in first class.
That's right, Steven.
Such a dick.
Now, I will say, when I started out in photography, having an F5, having a D2H, having that professional body made me feel better. Even though I wasn't great yet, I think that from a perspective marketing branding standpoint, someone seeing me use a full professional camera with those big lenses leaves just an impression in their mind more than someone who was shooting, say, an F100, a D100 Nikon that was a piece of shit, that was like an amateur consumer looking camera. I was young. I needed something to help me stand out. Yeah. So I had the professional gear before I should have and before I was capable. So there were times where having that professional gear helped me get shots that I wouldn't have gotten because I wasn't good enough yet. Now it's like I'm really good and the gear is really good. Put those things hand in hand and you get great results.
Best of the best. Back to the A1 discussion. I think, if anything, the R5 Mark II compares better than the R1 to the A1. I mean, you're essentially getting an A1 in that R5 Mark II with the 45 megapixel sensor at 30 frames per second, 14-bit RAW. But you also are getting that 14-bit RAW even at the 30 frames per second rate, where the A1, I believe, drops down to that 12-bit RAW after 20 frames per second, I believe. So that's the other thing about these cameras. They are both now, Canon has updated their electronic shutters with full 14-bit RAW capability, where before it was always 12-bit RAW. And obviously the R5 Mark II, a lot of people I see are saying, like, it's only the same sensor, 45 megapixels. It's like, no, it's a BSI stacked sensor. First of all, the old one was not BSI, back illuminated. And on top of that, it's stacked with an incredibly fast readout. The readout for this one is, I believe, 1/160th of a second for their flash sync. And the R3 is 1/180th. So it goes to show that it's just a hair behind
fraction
the R3. So you're looking at about 6.2 milliseconds over 5.5 that the R3 has. So essentially this is R3 shooting speeds at 45 megapixels at 30 frames per second. Flagship? I mean,
well, but let's look at this. You have A1 and you have A9 III. The only difference between the A1, well, no, there is no difference. The A1's not even in a flagship body, in my opinion, and neither is the R5 Mark II, which puts those two very, very close to each other, because what the R5 II has that the A1 doesn't have is pre-shooting. So you have that ability. You're shooting 30 frames per second with the 14-bit RAW, and they go hard, those cameras.
So speaking of pre-shooting, I'm glad first that Canon has implemented pre-shooting properly in these cameras and not that weird implementation like the R6 Mark II had, where you had to basically extract a RAW file from like a weird video clip, and it was just all kinds of stuff going on with that. This is now proper pre-shooting, so you get half a second, which is 15 frames for the R5 Mark II and 20 for the R1.
Yeah, up to 15 if you're shooting at 30.
But what's annoying, and we pointed this out in the video, is that you are constantly buffering 15 or 20, depending on which camera you had. You can't choose how many frames, and you can't choose how many seconds before. It's just always half a second. It's enabled or disabled, and that's it with Canon. They oversimplify it. It's very Mac-like in my opinion. It's just on or off, that's it. There's no tweaking in between, where I've always felt like Sony is more the PC version of the camera world, where they give you every little nitty-gritty detail that you can adjust and fine-tune in the settings. Like you can go all the way from a tenth of a second, or even before that, all the way to 1 full second in tenth of a second increments, which is pretty crazy, and adjust that frame rate on top of that.
Yeah, one of the harshnesses that I have on the R1 is, people will be like, well, stuff can come with a firmware update. It's the same thing I say about Nikon, right? I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, it's okay for Canon to do it, but it's not okay for Nikon to do it.
Well, we've always hit that it was the autofocus they were always saying is better via the firmware update. I'm fine with new features being implemented. It's just software-based at that point.
Correct.
But it's the hardware stuff we always hit on with the focus. That's two totally different things.
And what I can't do is I can't review a camera based off of what its future expectations are going to be. Sure. You have to review it for what they have now, under the assumption that something may never come out the way that they say. So you have to talk about it the way that it was. And that was why the flagship question came up in more in the first place, is you've had 4 years or 5 years to work on this flagship.
Exactly.
And you have so many things you could have gotten right out of the box that are wrong, that need to be fixed.
And every single time we pressed Canon about the R3 and why it's only 24 megapixels and blah, 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 and it's the flagship, and they would always say, it's not the flagship. Just wait till the flagship. And then what happens? The flagship comes out and it's 24 megapixels. It's essentially an R3 Mark II, which is totally fine if they were to say it's an R3 Mark II, or if they said that the original R3 was the R1 and this is an R1 Mark II. That's fine, but they're essentially just putting out like an S version like Nikon does, in my opinion, with this camera. It's not enough to really make waves.
I'm going to shoot. Well, I still think it's going to be fantastic once we get it into the real world.
Not downplaying that it's not a great camera. Not at all. But I'm just going to
use it.
Versus the competition, it needed to make a bigger splash.
Yeah. But again, even against the competition, it's going to have better ISO capability, better, cleaner files.
I mean, the autofocus.
It's going to do that. And the autofocus,
absolutely insane,
is the best autofocus in history.
Which Canon has already had great autofocus. This is just that new action priority, which, obviously it's limiting to people that only shoot ball sports, but it's still an amazing thing. And it makes me question how many more sports will they add moving forward? How many more different types of these new focus modes will they expand upon?
Well, but even if you don't have that on, the autofocus is still freaking incredible.
Yeah, yep.
Faster and better than the R3.
It's so sticky, and I know they made a point too with the briefing to say that it's much stickier than the previous generation. When the subjects move in front, completely block the subject you're shooting, it's still locked on to that subject behind. And this is without you even adjusting the case settings at all, which are now simplified to just auto or manual. You kept it at auto, just baseline, and it was still insanely sticky when people would move in front of the subject, which has always been a thing for, like, that's what we always hit Nikon about. It tends to not be as sticky, but it's definitely getting better for sure. Don't get me wrong. The other little thing about these cameras is that they still stuck to that 2.0 protocol with CF Express B card slots, which means we're going to have to wait another generation, another 4 years for 4.0 to be implemented, when I know the next Nikons and Sonys are now going to have that 4.0, which means just bigger buffer, more shooting power, better, faster transfer rates, all of that. I mean, essentially double the speed of your CF Express B cards.
For me, choosing an R1 over an R5 Mark II, comes down to many of the things I've talked about, but I also need to talk about the electronic viewfinder, the feel of the body, the build quality. Those are things that I prefer. I want the bigger, better EVF. The EVF is far superior on the R1 than it is on the R5.
Well, the R5 Mark II is essentially the R3 EVF. I'm pretty sure they literally just gave it the R3 Mark II, or the R3 EVF.
It's just like there's a thing when you pick up a pro body versus not a pro body.
Of course.
I don't want to be seen shooting the other one because, again, I want to use the best of the best. I think it's a perception thing for me.
For me, it's throw on a grip and you still have that look from far away.
Nah, that grip looks like bullshit. That looks amateur-y.
I'm just saying, to a non-photographer, it's still going to look like a big camera. Bigger the better, like women say.
Like my arms. So, like... But still, for me, it's a perception thing, and it's a confidence thing in my own body, right? I feel more confident with that. Yeah, I can shoot with anything.
Your camera's like your body.
I'm just telling you, man. I have more confidence with my arms. I have more confidence in myself because of the physical nature of it. It's just that's my personal choice. So I just feel like I want to use the best of the best with honor, sir, at all times. So,
how do you feel about pricing with these two cameras?
I think they
because we didn't find out pricing until the day before.
Yeah, that's why when I say 4,000-ish price point and 6,000-ish price point in the video,
because we were only told a range.
We were told a range, and
we assumed the lower end of that range.
I would have preferred that they'd hit at 6,000 and not $62.99
and 4,000,
and I would have preferred that it hit at 4,000 and not $42.99. At the end of the day, the extra couple $100 isn't going to break the bank for people that are buying this.
And the flagship is actually less than I initially thought it was going to be, because typically Canon has always done $6,500 for their flagships. The 1DX Mark III, I'm pretty sure, still sells for $6,500. So $6,300, I get it, but again, it's only $300 more than the R3. So was that the flagship? And you just said it wasn't. Same pricing, pretty much.
Yeah, they're never going to admit to that, and we could be wrong about that too, but it sounds good.
They're never, the other thing too, I just want to real quick bring up that the video features too for the R5 Mark II, they really did kind of merge the R5C with this camera. Now, it doesn't offer everything. Like the R5C, I believe, does 4K 60 oversampled. I am surprised that they didn't do that. They still kept the same 4K 30 oversampled mode, and that's it. You can only go up to 30p. It obviously goes to 8K 60, but I just really don't think many people are shooting in that mode. You do have the new fan grip, which is great. I know a lot of people question the ports on the side, talking about the weather sealing. I was told that the ports are just vents that go behind like the screen. The actual chassis of the body is not, it's not going behind that. It's not going into the body. It's just going behind the plastic. So it's not really an open air hole in the camera.
It's not something I'd really worry about too much.
Well,
personally.
Everyone keeps bringing up the overheating fiasco that Canon dealt with the whole R5 issue. For us, after that initial firmware update of 1.1, whatever it was, it has never been an issue for us. Like the actual videos we filmed on the R5, and the initial cut for the R1 was 60 minutes long. Obviously, we had to stop at that 30-minute mark, but it was 60 minutes long. That's how long we filmed for. No overheating. We didn't have a fan or anything on it. It's just always been fine. And we shoot in 4K oversampled, 4K 24, all I. So the highest bit rate pretty much that thing offers. And it's really never been an issue for us. Obviously, that 30-minute limit is a pain in the ass, but they have lifted that, so that's a good thing too. And the biggest thing too for me is now you can finally record audio when you're doing slow motion in like 120p or 240p. You could still turn it off and have it that baked in 30p playback file without audio, but I don't know why you would do that. I like the flexibility of having 120p in actual 120p with audio. So that's a huge win for Canon, finally.
Yeah, and we'll switch to those here in the studio.
Yep.
For those wondering, we have the R5s in the studio. People are like, are you going to sell those? No, actually, those go back to Canon, and we will swap them out for R5 Mark IIs here in the studio. That's just the best way for us to do it.
Real quick, too, to add on to that video talk, you can finally shoot 10-bit 422 video without having to be forced to shoot log. And it now has C-Log 2, which is great. And they've always said that you need the dynamic range of the sensor for C-Log 2, and the other cameras weren't capable. I think we kind of now know that it was really just Canon saying that. They could have put C-Log 2 in the other cameras, and they chose not to, so they can protect their cinema line. So there's that.
I think we hit what we needed to hit.
Yeah.
We'll have more when we finally get bodies. I don't think we're going to get bodies. I think I won't get an R1 body until I'm heading to Kenya again in December. So I don't know when R5 Mark IIs are coming. I'm hoping that we get those shortly to start playing with. We've got a lot of comparison videos to work on, because I know people want to know R5 Mark II versus R1 and R5 Mark II versus A1 and all of those things. You want real information, you come to Fro Knows.
The Fro does know. Yo, Fro knows.
Yeah, I know stuff. I know some stuff. I talk a lot.
I love when you have your hair down. The people are always like, well, I guess he doesn't know in this video. There's no Fro.
Yeah. Whatever. Hair does not make me a good photographer or a bad photographer, Steven.
I was talking to you yesterday about this when we did the AF video. I'm like, man, the video just looks so much better when you have your hair down. You don't have that like hat that you're wearing, the natural hat that blocking the light like your Fro. The light is actually hitting your face from all angles and it looks perfect. And then you got that nice contrast with the curls. Like there's not that flat look and poof of your hair. Looks so much better.
Yep.
So much easier to light when you do your hair down.
I don't even care. Whatever.
Oh,
we do it.
I care.
It doesn't even matter. Better. No, I mean, I don't care either way. Like hair up, hair down. Sometimes, stick with the brand, and then other times it doesn't matter. I like my curls.
No, I would never say don't do a video because you don't have your hair up.
I'm sure I've got other notes to talk about, but we're going to end it right there, guys. Thank you very much for waiting an extra day for this, and that's it. Anything you want to add, Steven?
That is it.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for listening. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.
Bye.